Okay.
Okay, well, today I was asked to do a little bit of a talk on my experience of being with those who are at the end of life, those who are dying. And it's a very wonderful subject for me, but it's sort of strange because in the last month as I've been trying to put this together, I've been spending a lot of time with little people coming into the world. And I've been with 3 people who have delivered very high-risk babies, and one who is trying to keep her legs closed until tomorrow, Monday, so that I can get up there. But what I discovered is that this transition into the world and out of the world is very similar. And what is required when you are privileged to be able to have that place, be in that place, you're holding the space. There's very little you can do. There's nothing magic. There's nothing remarkable. You're just sharing the space of a pretty momentous occasion. So before I even go any further, I want you to really think about yourselves at those moments where you learn a lot, where you're open, where you're receptive, where you're integrated, where you know that there is something very special that's happening. I'm going to sort of do some quick editing here, and I want to start with just 3 short stories. I have been with, I think, 27 people who have died. And those 27 people are people who are more etched into my mind and my heart than even my own children, even the great loves of my life. And I wouldn't say that I understand fully why that is, except that perhaps when people are dying, they let go of ego. And when people let go of ego, they suddenly become fully who they are.
I'll do it, Emily. Emily. Emily, I'm going to do this when you left.
So when you move beyond ego, the question is, how do we know how to interact? How do we know how to socially interact with one another? And I think that the lessons that I've learned are primarily about that. Who are we when we recognize that we are being called to be fully who we are, and how do we know to move beyond ego? So, Russell. Let me tell you about Russell. I knew him well. I knew him probably better than anybody knew him. He had shared with me who he was in ways I had never expected a person to share with me the depth of and the many layers of who they were. When he was in the hospital, I came in one day and the head nurse said, "Who is she? What is she doing here? I do not understand her place in your life." And he said, "This is my spiritual wife."
Wow.
I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "Isn't that what this is all about?" So I'm talking about a kind of intimacy that goes beyond bodily intimacy. I'm talking about knowing each other without the ego. I'm talking about knowing beyond judgment. I'm talking about open and receptive without a personal agenda. And when people are dying, it's very clear that they don't need judgment anymore. It's over, folks. It's useless. You can't fix them. You can't correct them. There are no solutions in your hands, and you gotta let that stuff down. You just gotta drop it quick, because it has no place at that moment of transition. Russell had shared his hopes, his fears, his sins, and we had just gotten beyond those as obstacles. So they had nothing to do with him. The man talked about sins today, and I thought, when you're with people who are dying, sins are totally irrelevant. And when all the family is talking about how that guy messed them over, it's totally irrelevant. It has no more bearing. These people are no longer about our little social and personality issues and squabbles. So one day Russell called to me and said, I need to go fishing. And I said, thinking quickly to myself, I did all these things for people when they were dying, because I loved following their directions when they were dying, because it was some of the most creative things. So I immediately thought, I can get the van down, and I can lay down the seats, and I could get the van up to the shore, and he could go fishing. Yeah, sure. The man had 72 hours left, and I was going to get him fishing. So he looked at me, he said, I could go fishing with my sister and my dad. And I knew they had died. Or I could go with my brother and my nephew. And I said, oh yeah. So who would you like to go with? And he said, well, we wouldn't need to worry about the van or fishing license if I went with my dad and my sister. And I said, no, I guess we wouldn't. And he said, I think it doesn't really matter which point in the shore I fish at. And I said, what shore? And he said, the shore. And I said, the shore that you're going to go to with your dad and your sister. And the shore that you're going to go to with your brother and your nephew are on the same lake. And he said, Em, you know this. You know this. He used to say to me often, you know this. You know how it is. And I said, I don't. Here's another example of where I don't know. And he said, we only think we are not connected. It's the same lake. So I would ask you to remember that it is the same lake, and there are different places on the shore. And I don't claim any knowledge of afterlife, so I don't want to go there. But I certainly have been very, very comforted by what many people have shared with me at the end of their life. The second story was that I was a recipient of the AIDS Institute Award because of this community residence that I started for people living with AIDS, because I thought they had a right to a place to die with dignity. And so when I went forward to receive this award, the commissioner whispered without any congratulations, we don't even fund your program, but there were so many testimonials, we couldn't deny you this recognition. Now, I was supposed to have a speech to say when I was receiving this award for this community residence. Well, I was flabbergasted. I had no idea what to say. I accepted the award and sat down. And afterwards, they asked me to go upstairs to a classroom where people shared their testimonials. Now, testimonials, I would suggest that you're doing these great and wonderful things. Well, they weren't. People, one after another, kept saying, well, she did this, and she did that, and she was able to do this, and then she did that. But it was just ho-hum kinds of things. It wasn't remarkable. It wasn't unnecessarily generous. And I really did not understand what all this meant. And one man said, who I only knew once, who I'd only seen once, and he said, there were no conditions attached to what she gave. And I got it. I got it. That when you're standing by, wherever the transition is, and you're standing by, there can be no attachment. You're not there because you're going to get into heaven. You're not there because the family is going to be impressed. You're not there because you're going to feel better about yourself. You're there just to witness and honor the transition that's happening. That isn't easy. I said to John a couple of weeks ago, he said, well, how is it all with all this baby stuff that's going on? And I said, I'm trying to be present. I just am trying to be present. Because again, my daughter said, Mom, I thought when you got here, you'd be able to do something to make this different. And I said, I can't. And I thought to myself, well, what am I doing here? I mean, what am I doing here? And then I remembered, oh yeah, I'm just going to hold the space. I'm just going to try to stand beyond my own agenda, my own needs, her agenda, the hospital's agenda, whatever. And then finally, my mother was dying. And I would suggest to you, my siblings said to me, it was very strange that my mother should have me there with her because she had a lot of trouble with me. Of her 6 children, she really had trouble with me. But there I was at the time of her death. Remember, if you are asked to be there at the time of somebody's dying, it's because you can do it. It has nothing to do with anything else. It's because you can be there. And you will rise to the occasion. And my sister kept saying, look, it's incoherent rambling. You're making something out of incoherent rambling. Well, it was anything but incoherent rambling. And I would suggest that many of us have missed the golden opportunities of being with those who are dying because we thought it was incoherent rambling. It doesn't matter what is being said. It is not incoherent rambling. At one point she said to me, there's a vehicular contraption here to pick me up. And I said, a vehicular contraption? And she looked at me and she said, oh, you're the one who can't spell. I said, that's right. So she spelled vehicular contraption. And then she said, but just look at that. Just look at it. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not only the one who can't spell, but I'm also can't see. So could you illustrate it for me? And she looked at me and she said, why don't you just put your head here on this pillow and look at what's in front of you? And I said, I can't see that. And she illustrated beautifully. I could even see the little round light bulbs. I could see the running board. I could see exactly what she saw. And I said to this woman, I saw the elegant Victorian embattled woman, I said, do you think that they're here for you? And she said, well, I don't know. But I would never go anywhere I wasn't invited.
Interesting. I'm glad you got invitation.
I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to say. And so I said, perhaps if you knocked, it would be open. And she turned and looked at me. Although at that point she was never looking, she was never seeing me. And she said, oh, Emmy, I am a seeker.
What?
A seeker.
Oh, thank you.
And I said, well, perhaps you have been found. And she said, I wish it were so, but not yet. And drifted off into a place that I couldn't follow her. So of all the hundreds of stories that I have to share with you about dying, I thought to myself, why did I share these stories? But I remembered it's primarily because it's the name of the little talk here is Standing By at the End of Life. And I would suggest that, first of all, Russell is right. We do know a lot about dying. We know a lot about letting go. We know a lot about losing things which are treasures and having to let go of things and move on to other things. I think Russell is right in saying that I could feel my heart beating when he was talking about the lake. I could feel myself thinking I'm not big enough or evolved enough to be able to have this information. I think that I could, not only could I not spell vehicular contraption, but a part of me couldn't believe that there was a vehicular contraption that was there to pick her up. And yet a part of me knew that yes, we create our lives and we create our death. And her agenda, her personal beliefs, her personal history kept playing out right up to the very end. And I've seen that again and again and again. The way you live is the way you die. Practice dying every time you have the opportunity. Nobody has ever described a terrifying place to me when they talked about dying. Nobody, ever. Never. It's all been quite familiar, and it was just me who was just on this side of the veil. And I couldn't see what was just on the very other side of the veil. But they weren't alarmed by, they assumed that I understood. They assumed I could see the vehicular contraption. They assumed that I knew about the lake. They assumed that I understood what the actions were that were worthy of the award. So we got to figure out a little bit more about who we are as the essential selves, because the essential self is the person who's called for when standing by at the end of life for another person. The idea of having a special gift, I don't know that it really is a special gift. It is just simply I think it's just about being present. And I think that very often we don't know what present means. What does it mean to be present? But it means perhaps to have no expectations. I could give the cell phone to a man. He told me that I gave him my cell phone at Christmas time because I was leaving him in the hospital and he wasn't going to be connected to anybody. And I had a cell phone. And this man was going to die if he didn't have some way to connect to something. And I said to him, Tracy, are you ready to die? And he said, why am I here? And I said, I don't really know, but if you want to stay, perhaps you'll need a cell phone. And I gave him the cell phone. And in his testimonial, he described that cell phone as really a link to God. Another young woman who I had come to see her, and she was very sick, and she had 4 children, and I stopped and bought a chicken and some collard greens. And before I went to see her, I put the collard greens and the chicken on the stove. And in her testimonial, she said, she came to help me die and fed my children first. So at the end of life, when people are trying to let go, they are looking at us in ways which are very generous and very open-hearted. Now, I only thought I was bringing some chicken and collard greens to, because, I knew the situation. But what she saw it as was that I had come to help her die, but fed the children first. So remember that the simple, mundane way that we do and deal in the world is transformed. We are transformed by those who see us from that place. The Hindu, the Hindu, this seminary was just sort of a little perspective here from in March of last year, I thought, good grief. What did I get myself into? Remember that? Oh my gosh, why did I do this? Who do I think I am? What do I think I'm doing? How am I going to do this? These people are totally unrealistic. They haven't a clue. And now they're going to talk about the retreat on top of everything else, and I've still got 16 papers that I have to write. And there was a whole lot of stuff that had been kicked up for me. A whole lot of stuff. And I was real disappointed in religion. I was real disappointed in what we had done in the name of religion. And I felt very personally betrayed, and I felt very personally adrift. And there were 2 people who really pulled me out of the coals. And one of them was a sadhu, a man who was the king of India, a northern Indian community. He had 6 castles, he had 5 cars, and he had 6 children. They had all been raised. He had made a fortune in India. And he came to this country to see one of his sons who was at Tufts University, and saw the uncle of his, somewhere in his family, who was a sadhu here in this country, and he said, I am a king. I have more wealth and power in India than almost anybody else. Why am I so unhappy? And the story that was shared earlier was absolutely to the point, because you have seen how unhappy the world is. And he said, so what do I do? Now that I know all the power, and I have all the riches, and I have all the things that the world has to offer, what do I do to find happiness? And he said, his teacher said, you pick up your bowl and walk. And he said, but I'm a king. And he said, so you can't walk in India, and you can't walk in Europe, but you better find a place to pick up your bowl and walk, because you have so much you need to let go of before you have to die. You've got a great deal of work ahead of you. And he went to Venezuela, where he didn't speak the language, where nobody knew a king from India, from Adam. Well, no, that's probably from Adam. I never thought of it that way. But sure, probably. And that's where he picked his bowl up. And that's where he walked. And actually, I met him at the ashram. The ashram is quite a wonderful place to go and visit, I gotta tell you. And he told me at the ashram that the reason he needed to come to the Americas was we didn't know that we all died. And that Westerners had very little concept that they died. And that they were really quite demented in the inability to understand that we don't all leave this world at some point. And I remember going back and looking that up and seeing that the Hindu have 4 quarters to a lifetime. And the first one is to take on the world. And then the second one is to be the householder. And then the third one is to have to begin to give up all of the trappings of the world. And you're very relieved and you're very reassured to be able to give up the trappings of the world, the trappings of the institutions, the trappings of the religion, the trappings of the family, the trappings of all that stuff that goes into the world. But the 4th quarter is where you also have to give up the things you love. So I would say, just in closing, that one of the things that's very important to really respect when you are with those people at the end of life and their families is they are giving up, not only, if they haven't done the work of dying, they're giving up a lot of stuff, but they're having to give up what they've only just discovered that they love. And again and again and again, people have told me about just the last week of life, they discovered what they loved. They discovered who they loved. They discovered what they wanted for that person, or for that thing, or for that part of themselves. And it was only at that moment, because we are so unpracticed, because we are so unconscious of the passage of dying, that we are totally unprepared for what is just a holy instant. And to be there when somebody takes that last breath is a moment to be eternally grateful for. I have a great deal of respect for the body and for the world. And we abuse it, the world and the body, but we know it to be the greatest comforter and the greatest, the source of our being. And when you are invited to be there with somebody at the end of their lives. Just know that you are very blessed, that you have been given the opportunity to embrace another person on a soul level that is real special. Thank you, Emily.